it's important to recognize that there is nothing inevitable or preordained about the system of radio broadcasting that we have today. Early on, in the early years of radio in the 1910s and 20s, the U.S. government had to decide what system we were going to have for radio. Would it be more of a nonprofit, public form of broadcasting, as was ultimately adopted in a number of Western European countries and in the UK, such as with the BBC, or would we have a more commercial-oriented approach to broadcasting, financed by advertising and largely owned and operated by private companies? After a very intense debate about that issue, our society and the U.S. government adopted a primarily commercial-driven system for radio that would be financed by advertising, commercial sponsorship, and largely operated by private firms, private companies. Well, that leads us to talk about what is the role of nonprofit radio in the radio sector, and how, as a society, have we decided what is the appropriate role for public radio and nonprofit radio. Again, early on, when the U.S. government was setting up the system for radio in society, commercial broadcasters and interests largely won out in that debate. The U.S. government allocated most of the prime real estate on the electromagnetic spectrum to private companies for commercially sponsored radio stations. Nonprofit radio stations, public radio stations, largely got the leftovers and the scraps. Historically, the U.S. government allocated less desirable space on the electromagnetic spectrum for public broadcasting and nonprofit broadcasting. That's why when you turn on the radio, when you're listening to FM radio, you have to kind of turn all way down to the left side of the dial to get to the public radio stations, because those are the less desirable slots. So that said, in the early years of radio, the U.S. government did allocate some licenses for nonprofit purposes, and also approved very low-power 10-watt FM stations for non-commercial uses. But again, this paled in comparison to the signal strength of the commercial stations. There was a renewed debate and interest in public broadcasting and nonprofit radio in the 1960s, which led to Congress passing the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 that established National Public Radio, NPR, that provided live and syndicated programming that airs on nonprofit public radio stations, and also that 67 Act established the public broadcasting service, PBS, that was responsible for public television stations as well. NPR and PBS were intended to provide an alternative to commercial broadcasting, and to essentially provide forms of programming that were simply not sponsored by commercial interests. That there were certain forms of of culture, news, and documentaries that couldn't get sufficient funding from commercial broadcasters. And the idea was here that NPR and PBS would essentially fill in the gaps and provide types of programming that we just wouldn't hear or see on commercial radio or TV stations. But I guess the issue for us today is how much of a commitment are we still going to have for public broadcasting and nonprofit radio. NPR and PBS still survive today, but they are under some pretty vigorous attacks from Republicans and conservatives in Congress that essentially want to do away with any government funding for PBS or NPR. Conservatives oppose funding for public broadcasting and public radio for two main reasons. One, they argue that in a free society, it is inappropriate for government to underwrite or subsidize media. And two, conservatives often complain about what they see as the liberal bias on a lot of NPR and PBS programming. I guess this is a question for you guys to address in the discussion boards, which is, do you agree with those conservative arguments that there is no legitimate place for government or public funding of NPR or PBS or non-commercial radio? Or do you think it is a legitimate function of government to support these forms of public broadcasting that may provide programming that you're just not going to get from regular commercial sources? So, what do you think about that? The development of new technologies have provided us with other ways to enjoy radio besides just conventional over-the-air broadcasting. So, for instance, satellite radio has become increasingly successful through Sirius XM radio that people can listen to in their cars or at homes or online. Also, internet radio stations are becoming more successful as well with online-only radio stations like Pandora, where people can customize their own unique radio stations based on a particular artist or song they want to listen to. Also, with iPods, people are listening to podcasts rather than traditional talk radio. So this, I think, raises one interesting question for me, which is, will conventional radio broadcasters continue to be successful with this increasing array of alternatives, or will technologies like satellite or internet radio increasingly prove to be an economic threat to conventional broadcasters?